Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays here from us at Betamax Blocker. The past couple weeks we've talked about several Christmas crime capers, from serio-comic crime thrillers to comedies starring our favorite classic comedians, to budget film noirs, to experimental detective films, all of which with a Christmas theme. What do you say we do 3 more Christmas classics to sort of cap off our series, and it'll be my Christmas present to you. Are you ready? Starting with the oldest one first, let's go back to 1930 and talk about Little Caesar. Little Caesar was, of course, the film that made Edward G. Robinson a star almost overnight. Little Caesar wasn't the very first gangster movie ever made. Of course, there were silent ones, such as D.W. Griffith's Musketeers of Pig Alley, or von Sternberg's Underworld, both of which we'll talk about in this channel someday, because they're both pretty interesting. It wasn't even the first talking gangster film. Movies like Lights of New York preceded that, but Little Caesar was the movie that made it sort of an important, lucrative genre. You can clearly see this DVD is branded as part of the Warner Brothers Pictures Gangster Collection there. And as we mentioned before, made a star out of art collector Edward G. Robinson. So Little Caesar, by today's standards, is very basic. You know, a small-time hood wants to be a big-time hood, starts running with a big city mob, and pretty soon shoots his way up to the top, basically, and then has a spectacular downfall. And films that came a little later, like James Cagney's The Public Enemy and Paul Muni's Scarface, did a lot more with the premise. Little Caesar's very basic and pretty predictable, but honestly it works. It has some of the creakiness we expect in early sound films too. Some scenes look like they might have been shot with silent movie cameras, a few scenes of clunky dialogue and so on, but honestly, it's still a pretty good experience. Robinson's performance and the performance of most of his co-stars make it pretty good. You know, Sidney Blackmer, very natural as the big boy, kind of the highfalutin politician who also has his hand in various underworld activities. You have George E. Stone as Otero, his main kind of henchman. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. isn't amazing as his best friend who wants to give up the life of being a hoodlum, but isn't quite willing to do that yet because he doesn't want to disappoint his friend, and he's very conflicted, that sort of thing. Of course, has the famous ending line, "Mother of Mercy, is this the end of Rico?" which you can find on many different compilations of famous movie quotes and so on. But, you know, for all its creakiness and its kind of basic plot structure, Little Caesar's definitely a good watch. You can see why it made Robinson such a big star. In a moment, we'll talk about some of his other forays into the genre as well. Now, Little Caesar isn't too much of a Christmas film. It's actually more of a New Year's film. And I've done a video on movies you should watch for New Year's. I probably should have included this in that collection instead of here, but I did still want to talk about it, though. Some scenes involving Thomas Jackson nosing around. He delivers one of the best lines, a very sarcastic delivery as the police lieutenant. "I didn't wish you guys a Merry Christmas." But, you know, it's kind of in the background. But if you're looking for something different to watch for Christmas and want to get kind of a historical perspective on the gangster genre and its stars, Little Caesar is definitely a good place to start. Little Caesar resulted in Edward G. Robinson being typecast in films about organized crime. Here is a Warner Brothers 4-pack of various gangster movies that he was featured in. The Greatest Classic Films Collection, which we'll talk about more in a moment, was at one point rebranded for crime movies. It's the Greatest Gangster Films Collections, as you can see there. And today we're going to talk about one called Larceny Inc. Larceny Inc. is a very fun and very Christmassy gangster movie. It's also a comedy, of course. We know gangster comedies are certainly doable. We talked about The Lemon Drop Kid in the last video. In Larceny Inc. from 1942, Edward G. Robinson plays a fast-talking, suave criminal just released from prison, along with his good friend Broderick Crawford, who's kind of the muscle of the group. Broderick Crawford several years before his Oscar win, that kind of thing. But they decide to buy a luggage store in a struggling kind of small town and gradually use it to dig into the bank next door, use the basement of the luggage shop to tunnel into the bank's vault, that kind of thing. And doing it at Christmas time, give them more time to get away, nobody will expect it, that kind of thing. And naturally, various complications arise. They get attached to their neighbors, other struggling shop owners, trying to make this little suburb, this little kind of strip mall thing, into a successful business venture. Nosy bank examiners who are talking about buying the luggage store and using it to expand the bank's vault and wanting to check the basement and kind of see what's going on down there. And of course, a young Anthony Quinn as a psychotic criminal who originally came up with the idea for the bank job, and when he gets sprung from behind bars, he shows up and wants to carry out the job himself, threatening to kill everybody, including Robinson, that kind of thing. Anthony Quinn is actually one of the best things about this movie, too. So Larceny Inc. is a lot of fun. I mean, it has aged a little bit, I'd say, in the sense that it is very 1940s based. It's kind of hokey in places, but at the same time, I like the premise. And Edward G. Robinson was very good at doing comedic parts. Indeed, another one on here, The Little Giant, is a gangster comedy from a decade earlier, from kind of the mid-1930s. And I really like that movie, too. So Edward G. Robinson had comedy chops. He didn't always use them. You know, Little Caesars played pretty straight. But Larceny Inc., of course, played for laughs. We have Jack Carson as the bombastic luggage salesman. Edward Brophy pops up as one of Robinson's henchmen, who decides to buy extra suitcases and trunks and other doodads to sell at the luggage store to keep the front up, not realizing just how much inventory they're going to get, that kind of thing. Of course, I mentioned Anthony Quinn. Jackie Gleason has a small role as kind of a waiter at a lunch counter, and who is watching Jack Carson and Jane Wyman fall in love with each other, that sort of thing. So it's got some of that schmaltziness to it, but honestly it works both as a Christmas film and as a crime caper movie. It has a very rewarding ending, which is believable, has a wonderful supporting cast. If you're looking for a quirky, offbeat comedy, you know, we've talked about things like We're No Angels. This fits a little bit into that category. It's not quite as dark as that movie, but it is a fun Christmas crime caper, and I highly recommend viewing it. I could have said I was once shot in the tabloids, but let's be honest, they weren't anywhere near my tabloids. Dashiell Hammett, we might remember predominantly for his book The Maltese Falcon, one of the most famous crime stories, and by extension, film noirs of all time. But his novel The Thin Man was also quite successful in its day, and it will be our final film, both for this video and for this series that we will discuss today. Let's talk from 1934, The Thin Man, William Powell and Myrna Loy as Nick and Nora Charles. They drink a lot, they banter a lot, they're far classier and more elegant than you or I could ever hope to be, and of course they also solve mysteries with the help of their little dog, Asta, played by Skippy. So The Thin Man was a movie I first saw as a teenager, getting into movies of the 30s and that kind of thing. And as a kid, I didn't like The Thin Man at all. I thought it was very much overrated. I mean, it was a Best Picture nominee, or in some cases, a finalist for many of the American Film Institute's best, list of best films or best detective movies or best comedies, that kind of thing. So it was very, very popular. It's in the Library of Congress, all that. But I never could really get into it until I read the book, which I actually did last Christmas there, and the book gave me a whole new appreciation for the movie, because you might remember we talked about The Big Sleep a little while ago when we talked about some of the more noir-based films. And I mentioned how The Big Sleep had a very confusing plot, but the plot didn't really matter. It was more based on the chemistry of the stars, and The Thin Man kind of fits into that category. Both the book and film have a very convoluted plot involving an inventor, the eponymous Thin Man, who's known for being very tall, very thin, and very mean. How he realizes that his secretary has been cheating him, possibly with accomplices. His daughter wants to get married, the wedding present's missing because it's been embezzled, and so on. And there's a very wide range of suspects of who would eventually kill him. Who all was involved in this theft? Why would they kill him? How did they dispose of the body? All that stuff. And it's very confusing though, and even in the book it's kind of all over the place, but the book does a better job of kind of summing up the plot. The Thin Man movie occasionally stops the plot, so we could have scenes of Nick and Nora bantering and doing comical things, you know, shooting ornaments off the Christmas tree, or balloons for some reason, off the Christmas tree, you know, with a little pop gun, drinking with all their friends, and having several opportunities for witty and urbane banter that will, of course, eventually help to solve the mystery, and then making Lieutenant Guild, played by Nat Pendleton, we talked about him when we talked about the Marx Brothers movies, making him look like a fool at every possible turn, and showing up all the detectives and everything like that with their ace sleuthing. But the book does a better job of explaining the plot and allowing Nick and Norma to both be very dynamic characters. And the movie doesn't quite balance it as well. Of course, W.S. Van Dyke was known for one take only, and that sort of thing. So I don't doubt some things were trimmed, or some things were just taken as they were and they weren't reshot or reworked at all. But I had a whole new appreciation after reading the book, because the plot made a lot more sense. I was able to really enjoy The Thin Man last time I watched it. Of course, it spawned many sequels, some of which are in this collection, but not all. Interestingly, the Thin Man name is used in all the sequels, but he's really only a character in this one. Later it was kind of changed that, oh, William Powell is the Thin Man, but that's not really what it is. Our missing inventor character, Clyde, he is the actual Thin Man, that kind of thing. And he does have a small role in the movie to set things up and get them going, that kind of thing, and then he kind of disappears in a surprisingly not climactic murder scene. It's kind of left very ambiguous, perhaps by design. But when we have a wide range of suspects, his chiseling ex-wife, her boyfriend, who turns out to already be married, but is going to get married a second time, be a bigamist, that kind of thing. His daughter, played by Maureen O'Sullivan, so we know she's not actually the killer, but she's going to be one of the main suspects, because it's Maureen O'Sullivan, and you want to give her screen time, that sort of thing. The sneaky lawyer, played by Porter Hall, who always seems to know what's going on. Harold Huber pops up in a great supporting role, as does Edward Brophy, who he's talked about in Larceny Inc. as a gunman. All kinds of fun, quirky characters. If you can handle kind of the weird balance between comedy and sort of crime thriller, mystery, exploration sort of thing, then I think you'd really like The Thin Man. If not, it probably wouldn't be your particular cup of tea. Like I said, it took reading the book to make me a fan. The book, I would say, is better than the movie as well. But the movie's pretty faithful to it, and again, I'm not going to turn down William Powell and Myrna Loy bouncing off each other, as they were appeared in many movies outside of the Thin Man films as well. Sequels to The Thin Man are all pretty good also, so I can recommend them too. They're a little more conventional because we know who the main characters are, and we can kind of just follow them. There's not quite as much jumping around and trying to make a really complex plot work flawlessly, all that jazz. But The Thin Man, I had a good time with it, and very Christmassy too. They have a big fancy Christmas Eve party where these people drink so much that if you or I drank that much, we'd probably drop dead. But an excuse to break out some martinis and Manhattans and old fashions, I guess, and just go to town. And a pretty fun, quirky comedy there. If you like a good mystery comedy with some Christmas trimmings to it, I'd say The Thin Man would be right up your street. So join me next week for a special Christmas surprise, along with my good friend Steve Lewis. We'll talk about that. Please comment some of your favorite Christmas films below. They can be crime capers or just regular Yuletide fun. And thanks for watching as always. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you next time. Happy holidays!